Welcome to the Diverse Minds podcast, where we give you the tips, tools and techniques you need to be a mentally healthy and inclusive leader. Each week, you'll hear about a variety of topics linked to mental health, well-being and diversity that will enhance both your professional practice and personal well-being.
Welcome to the 171st episode of the award-winning Diverse Minds podcast. And this month's theme is all about intersectionality and disability. And to join me in talking about this in greater detail this week, I'm joined by Martin Griffin. Martin is a UK-based senior mining geotechnical engineer. He's a chartered engineer and chartered geologist and works for the international multidisciplinary niche consultancy Knight Piésold in their London office. He identifies as neurodivergent, autistic, dyslexic and dyspraxic, and is registered as disabled by being visually impaired. Presently, he specialises in mining and ground risk and uncertainty. He works on geotechnical engineering aspects of an international mining project from concept to closure. He's also been involved in ground engineering teams for several UK civil engineering megaprojects. Currently, Martin is serving as an elected Geological Society Council member and former committee member of several other national executives in the geotechnical arena. He is Geological Society scrutineer for chartership candidates, Keratoconus UK charity trustee, international journal peer reviewer for several technical and specialist journals, STEM ambassador to local secondary schools, and a ground forum STEER STEER mentor for underrepresented groups. Martin has been a lay EDI champion and advocate since 2013 in the geoscience and engineering sectors for underrepresented groups, acting as an advisor, mentor, and is frequent LinkedIn blogger on all aspects of EDI, disability, and neurodiversity. We're really excited to have him here today to talk more about what workplaces can do to move from awareness to acceptance to action. So, Martin, a huge welcome to the show.
Hi, thank you very much for welcoming to your show.
So we were talking earlier about, the term geotechnical engineer. I've just read out your bio, and I think it might be good for maybe you to tell listeners what a geotechnical engineer is and what they do and what you're doing on a day-to-day basis.
Okay. To me, an engineer is someone who identifies or detects a problem, and then we find out proper solutions. So I work with the ground, which is soils and rocks, to see how the soils and rocks behave. So we do foundations and such like. But I'm working on sort of international mining projects, so for dams and for containing of mine waste. So for everything in your mobile phone, there's about 1 million tons of waste associated with that. I help design those in a safe manner. And then I'm also a geologist, so I sort of look at the geology and sort of characterize the project sites for the mine as well. It's a bit of there's interaction between geology and engineering to come up with proper solutions for clients.
I think it's so important at the moment. I mean, you just talked about mobile phones and the amount of waste it produces. And it makes me think about electric cars. And Again, people say it's cleaner, but it actually is it when we think about these car batteries and what goes into making them sustainable. So really interesting. And I don't know if you have any thoughts on that, actually.
It's that sort of that balance between we want to grow we grow as a society, but we don't want to have that environmental waste. But we have to, I think, as a society, we have to be mature enough to say, we want our phone, we want our electric cars to live, but we still need to deal with the waste, and we have to deal with what we're going to do with the metals, or we want the metals and do it in an environmentally friendly way. And that's I'm working on at the moment. I'm working on a consultancy. We're a niche consultancy in London doing this sort of specific solutions for clients.
Yeah, it's fascinating work. And I think that's the thing, isn't it? It just goes to show how interlinked everything is. And, we're talking about intersectionality and disability this month. And I think having your perspectives and the way that you maybe think differently from someone, quote unquote, neurotypical, and I don't like that term, but it's the one we're using. It's not ideal. We know that. I think presents a really unique way in which we can see these problems. You see the problems, and you can also see different solutions, or solutions that perhaps mainstream wouldn't necessarily see.
Yep. It's a bit of a hang up when you're doing risk management, because I do a lot of risk management. You can see the trade-offs between the advantages and the pros. And then people say to me, come up on one decision which is the best. And part of my autism, I have to ruminate for about 5 hours or 5 days or something on a solution. And I haven't got time to do that. But then, so it even comes down to the cost or the time or the best performance of the option. And hopefully that's an engineer's considered judgment as well as my own personal. Well, it is an engineering judgment rather than my own preferences.
And it's difficult, that term, the best, because what does the best really mean? And I think we're quite fixated with it in Western culture. Because as you've, I think, helpfully hinted at, is actually there's best in different contexts, and then you need time to review that. So yeah, how do you get the clients and people to understand that?
We have this, without going too technical, we have a criteria that we go through of all of these items, and then we weight each of them against a sort of other factors like environmental, political factors, and then we hopefully come up with the best solution for them. So
it's a very evidence-based engineering approach there.
And say sometimes, something, we don't want something in our own backyard, but we still want the metals, we still want but then a country like in Ghana, they don't want a gold mine next door to them, but we may want the gold from their country. So but then if we do it in a good way, we can train people to do best practices as well. So it's working in a responsible way and working with the clients, not working against them, and working with local people as well, not being colonial as well. And that's another form of intersectionality. And it's a lot of just working through for solutions and trying to get the best. It's not just all number crunching.
It's that holistic approach. And I think it's really helpful that you've mentioned the colonial aspect about, we in the West want these batteries, and we know that the gold is not generally, there's very, very little. There's some gold, isn't there, in Scotland, very little, but not enough to sustain what we need to do, or we want to do. So yeah, thank you for mentioning that as well. And on that point about inclusivity, thinking about UK workplaces, what does the term inclusive workplace in relation to disability mean to you? What does that look like?
Okay. With myself being autistic, dyslexic and dyspraxic and visually impaired, I think it means that you can be authentic. So you don't have to work doubly hard to be doing a normal day-to-day job, because I think we have enough struggles as it is. Like yesterday, I got out of the office at 5, and I got home by 8 o'clock because of public transport being rubbish. Because I got off the train at 6:30 and then I waited 1.5 hours for a bus to get home for a 60-minute journey. And I thought, that just, to me, that's not the workplace. But with workplaces, all our adjustments should be in place and we shouldn't have to fight for them. That really hacks me off when people say to me, I haven't got my adjustments. Well, I've struggled enough times in the past with getting adjustments, but my new employer, that within a week, we had all my adjustments, my text-to-speech software. And now every week I have a weekly catch up with my line manager. It's more like a psychiatrist chair, sort of saying what's going on. But I find that really hard because it's going deep down into me. But it takes time and trust with your line manager to talk what you need and why something's not working, why you can't do something, why you're good at something. Because I don't know why I'm good at something. I just know it's my autism or my dyslexia. And it's almost for them to recognise them in you, because sometimes we don't recognise it in ourselves. Does that make?
Yeah, it makes complete sense. And it's so true. And I know from providing support and conversations to disabled staff that's absolutely the case. But I think one of the difficulties is, and I have a really big bugbear about this. So for example, I wonder why, my generation, we didn't learn BSL as one example at school. So you have your modern foreign language and you have BSL, or in fact, and then maybe you want to learn another sign language, for example. And that would just mean that all of us would have a very basic level of signing. So people who are signing, part of the deaf community or the wider deaf community, capital D, small d, we wouldn't feel as isolated potentially, right? Yeah. So in the workplace, I'm just thinking about, Martin, if someone doesn't know, so it's a balance, isn't it? Because in order to declare or disclose your disability, and it might be a case of disclosure, you feel like you're telling a secret, there needs to be this environment of trust. And also people who are not currently disabled, from the non-disabled part of society at the moment, and often don't really understand what this means. They don't really know what adjustments are. So so how do you get to the point where people can ask the question in an appropriate manner? Because we don't need people to divulge medical information, but we do need to know what they need.
I would always say someone should get diagnosed officially, rather than sort of saying I'm self-diagnosed, because I think that doesn't carry as much weight. If anything goes belly up or pear-shaped, you've got an official document. And from that official diagnosis, you get a work needs assessment, and that will tell you by an expert, or you'd hope it'd be an expert, who tells you what adjustments you need. And I think there's other things you can do, like what I've highlighted in the past is accessibility passports. So you can bring in your work needs assessment into that. Your employer can get it, and that goes around with you, with your boss or your project managers. You don't have to keep on repeating the same mantra or the same thing about your disability or your autism again and again and again, which is so tiring and draining. You can get it reviewed every year with your line manager. And then you're talking about your conditions. They can see it. They can ask you when they're ready to talk about it. That seems to work well. And that it hasn't been really introduced a lot as much. We introduced that in the last company and they were really happy with that. We've just introduced that in the new company.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I do agree with you around the getting a diagnosis. The challenge is, of course, usually as adults, if you're an adult and you can, you've got a job, you've had a job for many years, and you think you've got autism, that process to get a diagnosis as an adult is pretty arduous. Yeah. So I don't know if you've got any thoughts on that, because I know a lot of particularly women who know that, but they are spending 3-4 years getting a diagnosis as an adult.
Yeah, patience, I think. I know it's not a very good answer, because we all wait for equality or thinking out the box. There must be some sort of charity we could set up. Someone could set up a charity to help people get the funding and get this assessments done quicker. Unless you did that AQ test online and say you're self-diagnosed till you know otherwise. Or badgering a GP, that's
the thing, and often GP, it depends on the. I'm not being negative about GPs. I'm not being negative about the NHS, but again, it will depend on the area, what the interest is, whether the practice are putting this forward, whether they've done the training, and also if we think about cost of living and everything else, it's very pricey. Many people can't afford to go privately. So I just wondered, if you'd had any thoughts.
And then also people mask because they fear the repercussions of saying they're autistic or dyslexic, because they think their employers are going to treat them less favourably. They're not going to get promoted, and they've got so far in their career, and they don't want that to jeopardise their career. So I understand that, but then I get saddened when I see the lack of role models in like engineering, particularly, and geology and construction, when people seem to be not ashamed, but if we want proper representation from people in society and make decisions or be helping the decision making, to get to that place, if people are speaking about us in the third person, and that really hacks me off when people were talking about us and not involving us in this decision making.
Well, it's the classic phrase, isn't it? Nothing about us without us. Yeah,
I keep banning that on LinkedIn a lot, just people look at me, so then you have to do an explanation what that means to people. And
yeah. And so what do you think the biggest challenges are for workplaces moving in from awareness? It's great to have some awareness training, where you've mentioned whether it's dyslexia, autism, visual impairment, but then what about the acceptance and being anticipatory rather than waiting and being reactive and someone waiting 5 months for their adjustments?
I think it's giving us opportunities to show that we can not be like everyone else, because because we are different. Because I know I was different since I was since really young, and I didn't fit in. And I think training has to be given to every line manager, and not just from top-down leadership, because you can get leadership talking top-down to us, but then it's got to trickle up as well. I think it's got to be something in the middle.
Yes, so it's about the awareness, but it's also about you've got to do the work, you've got to have the conversation and create that atmosphere of trust so these conversations can be had.
And I think, people, like employee resource groups, they're really powerful. We're trying to set one up in our company. We've piloted all that. That went really well. But that still needs senior leadership buy-in. Else you're just you're just a self-advocate, tired, exhausted EDI or champion or advocate on autism, and that gets so tiring.
Yeah. And if we go back to intersectionality, of course, you've got your lived experience of autism, but that's not necessarily going to be identical to a colleague's or someone else's.
Mostly, there's that saying, isn't there? You've met one person with autism, you've only met one person with autism. And it's so true because
also you're not just, no one is their autism. You are a whole person with a personality. Yes. And you have autism, which again, everyone's has a different, I always say certain elements will be dialed up, dialed down, and that is your profile, but with your personality and your lived experience and your culture and everything else around it.
Your spiky profile may be the same, but your culture setting, it comes back to culture again.
Yeah, absolutely. And so what do you think workplaces can do to create an accessibility and usability mindset? So you've talked about buy-in from senior leaders, and meeting in the middle, but how can we have this across an organization? We're thinking utopia here.
Yeah, I think from the get-go, when you have an accessible website, it has to start from the whole life employee cycle, from recruitment to when someone departs from that company. You can't just say, I want an inclusive company and have inclusive work procedures. But then if you've got hidden walls or glass ceilings that no one can achieve, it has to come from that inclusive culture. When you're screening for neurotypical candidates, that's a horrible word as well. But we're full of them, aren't we? Sorry. But if you're screening neurotypical people that are inclusive of one another, then surely they should be more accepting of us. But then I feel patronised when people say, "Oh, my daughter's autistic."
Yeah,
I know how you feel. No, don't. Your daughter's going to have a far better advantage than us because we're pioneering the way forward for it. Unless I'm not trying to be big-headed, but sorry.
But I think it goes back to that point, doesn't it? That I think if people said, my daughter's autistic, so I'm aware of some of the challenges, but I'd really like to hear things that, maybe you experience so we can eliminate some barriers. And I think that often you get it in the race space. People say, oh, it's well-meaning, but actually it's very irritating. And I don't know what it's like to be you, Martin, but I do know it from the cultural race perspective. Yeah. Yeah,
sure. But I think, like barriers, what barriers do you see? But sometimes we don't know the barriers because we just know work is very hard to get through. Or promotions, for example, we don't know how promotion systems work.
Yeah.
Till we don't get promoted or we get misappraised or something.
Yes. Yeah.
And then we have to talk to our line manager, have a meltdown. And they say, oh, why didn't you say that? But then that revises that system. And then I don't know. Or like it's professional bodies in institutes, if they don't recognise neurodiversity in their systems, then how are they going to attract more diverse candidates to get chartered? And that's the sort of thing I'm challenging at the moment as well.
So it's looking at the single points of failure within the system, isn't it? So looking at accessibility, usability and barriers and getting a broad perspective on that. So because people might not know, as you rightly said, they might not know the barriers. Some some you'll think, oh, sugar, that does put me at a disadvantage. So it's that, isn't it? It's that critical input and appraisal on what the system that's taken as read and quote unquote normal.
And what's good for us is normally good for a neurotypical person in general sense. And we're not being until rude when we say this is wrong. I know because as autistic people, generally we don't lie. I mean, I said to my boss, I can lie. You know, a typical autistic person is totally honest, and that's what you'll read in the literature. An autistic person is 100% honest all the time. But I joke with my boss, I can still lie to him if I want, or I can. I do know the difference between a lie, but sometimes I won't understand the minute size of that.
Yeah, that's a really good point, actually, because again, I saw something really, I don't know if it was on your LinkedIn actually, Martin, but have you seen that, the signs of neurotypical people, they tell, like, and it's like the infographics you get around autism, but summarizing, non-neurodivergent people. So it's not this cliche, yet there might be certain attributes, but you've got to talk to the person in front of you.
It's like when people say, "Oh, I've read the literature, or the information about autism," and say, "You should be rubbish at communication and social interactions." I mean, I've had to work at my communication skills and social interaction skills, because this year I've done about 7 presentations to different groups, but I've had to just keep on working at them. This is my fourth podcast of the year, raising awareness. But it's just something my wife says to me in jokes. I think she's being serious sometimes. She says, "You're an extrovert." And I said, "No, I'm an introvert. I want to just hide away from people, really." But the awareness and acceptance is by going out there and being, I wouldn't say being brave, we just have to be vulnerable and just accept our conditions for what they are and be genuine and be real. I think it's harder to take off a mask once it's on for about 50 years in my case. And if I've lived with this all my life, if I'm going to continue to hide it, I haven't lived in it since I've been born, and that's caused me a lot of problems in the workplace, I think. People have misunderstood it and not being a typical engineer or typical geologist, and then I don't know what typical looks like.
It's an interesting question, isn't it? And I think this is the problem. This is why we don't, you were saying, for getting the chartered accreditations for engineers, geotechnical engineers, you want people from all walks of life to be in the space. It's not really happening because of exactly the point I think you've just made. Well, thank you so much, Martin. And I want to know, as an incredibly busy professional and doing this campaigning and awareness raising work, how do you look after your own mental health? What are your top 3 tips that you'd like to share with listeners?
I'm just sorry if you bear with me. Yeah,
of course.
Okay. Yeah, I was thinking about this and I couldn't give a bit. This maybe sounds stereotypical. First one, sleep and rest and recover, because I think our brain overworks. Our body doesn't overwork, but we just think too much, and then we have so many things like ruminating. Sleep is so important to recover. Secondly, do something you really enjoy. It's not just maybe it's your special interest, but I like spreadsheets, so and I love football. So I have a football spreadsheet every week going on about predicting the scores and putting all the stats in and trying to model the results and such like. So that's the sort of thing I love doing, just to relax. And then I was thinking, what else? People are so important to me. And I'm doing this presentation I'm doing at Christmas. I've sort of tried to. This is one of the slides I'm doing, and it's sort of 6 external influences to try to bond to better. So immediate family, so that's your wife, your husband, or your children. Then your work colleagues, so people you work with in the immediate workplace. Professional colleagues, people in your same sector. Your larger family, like your grandparents or your mum and dads. Online strangers like yourself, like I've never met you before, but you're now a friend, so you're not an online stranger, but you're a professional. I would say a professional colleague or something. And then diverse voices, people that I've never would have met before, that online, that you just like a comment and then you just sort of connect with them. And then I was thinking, contrary to that, there's people I wouldn't want to meet, or try to avoid, because they could be harmful to us. So if you don't mind me sharing these 6 people. Little guys, people who know a little about autism, but they don't, because they just want to mingle with us and play around with us. Gatekeepers telling us, putting walls up for us. Costers, people who are putting barriers and charging money towards us. White knights are trying to fix us. Micromanagers, to people who are managing us and our time and managing everything we do. And those loud influencers on social media telling us, "Oh, this is what happened to me so successfully," and not talking about their failings. Or their failings are so big, and then they're showing off about their failures in such a way that they got happy stories in the end, all the end. Without mentioning names, but there's some people that I think.
I know got other colleagues who are dyslexic, and they feel very similarly about the influences that you're mentioning. So yes, Martin, it makes absolute sense to me.
The cost is like the cost of, as you said, the cost of diagnosis, or people charging out for courses. And I don't think we should have to pay to attend something like that because we're autistic. If we're not a academic or we're not a EDI specialist, we still have to pay for these things. But we've got the lived experience and we can't go to these things as much.
Yeah. Or what provision is there in the workplace to have a funding pot for people to attend these things if they are in work? And then if they're not in work, what are the provisions? I mentioned that about funding pot, but I could get funding pots perhaps for a technical conference. Yeah.
Even as an EDI champion or an advocate sector lead, because I'm seen as ground engineering sector lead in the UK, essentially, or I've been told that by peers, so it's quite challenging to be thought of that. But I can't get on in an EDI course easily enough to do that. But I want to move into the EDI space and to do something in an engineering consultancy one day maybe and do that.
Yeah, that's interesting, isn't it? So what's prioritized and what's seen as more important. And this is often what happens.
They're always lacking soft skills.
Yeah.
And how many engineers do you know that have emotional intelligence? And that's lacking. And spending time, and that comes down to how workplace can. And you can't train people in emotional intelligence. You can't go on a course. You can go on a course, but it doesn't actually give you that those broad shoulders of experience to have that almost like pastoral heart. Because engineers aren't pastoral. They're rigid and they think numbers. They think something's got to be done quantitative. Everything has to be done to a time. Everything has to work into our model perfectly. But people aren't like that. People are messy.
I have to say, though, I did love working with engineers because they'd be like, right, tell me how to solve it and I'll do it. And I'd be like, yay. So I often found that engineers were the department that I could get on side quite easily. And they would say, right, let's solve this, Lola, tell us what to do. So I totally hear you. But I also think there's a real appetite with engineers to get it sorted.
Yeah. My wife calls me a fix-it, the white knight kind. If she's got a headache or something, I say, I try to list all the symptoms and then try to fix. But that may be my male side as well. I've been told that's my male. There's a bit of that, and I think as an engineer, I want. But then, hopefully, I am a bit of emotional intelligent with my wife and empathy. And that's something autism we get told. Oh, you don't have empathy, but we show it in different ways. It may not immediately, but we can come back to.
So really, no, don't apologize. Really interesting. I loved your 6 positive connectors and 6 types of people that you don't want to connect with. That's very interesting. So,
and I think we can. With ourselves, we can have our head in the sand to ignore those sorts of people.
Right, okay.
Jack in the box people. Mm-hmm. People just pop up and then can't avoid. Great idea about autism to solve it in the workplace, but then it's not going to be one answer. It's going to your answer may be different from where you are.
Yeah.
And you've got to get a tailor-made solution to everyone.
That's the thing. I don't think it's about solving it, is it? I think it's about creating systems that enable this individuality and expression.
Yeah. I mean, there's that British Standards PASS documents for accessibility.
I've seen that. I don't think I've seen that. Yeah.
Neurodiversity in the workplace, and it talks about all adjustments that you can do. And it's PASS 6463.
Okay.
And it's all talking about, say lighting, sound, and best practices that you can do. Not that would help us to read a document quicker or process the information quicker, but make it be good for everyone, I think.
Yeah, that's true, and I don't think there's a lack of information out there. So, there is. So, if people want to know more about your work, Martin, how should they contact you? How do you like to keep in touch with people?
You can contact me on LinkedIn.
LinkedIn.
Mm-hmm. Or you can pass the link on to people.
Yeah, I'll include it in the show notes. Absolutely. So, LinkedIn is the best platform for you.
Yeah, and I generally don't reject people, unless it's people I really dislike.
You fall in the 6 categories,
But I think those people won't be listening to this in the first place, I don't.
So thank you so much for this really insightful conversation, for being really open and, great deep conversation and insights into autism, dyslexia and visual impairment. And thank you so much for your time, Martin, and kicking off as a guest for intersectionality and disability.
Okay, thank you very much.
Take care, everyone, and we'll see you in the next episode.
Thanks for listening to the Diverse Minds podcast. Don't forget to subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you access your podcasts from. You can also connect with me on Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn. Tune into next week's episode of the podcast, where I'll bring you more insights on mental health and inclusion. Bye for now.